400 years is a long time, man. That's a long time. But I guess when you consider it, if each person is living to 80 years, then 400 years is only 5 generations. So,
Wow.
what's up, everybody? So, my name is Michael Stevenson. Welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel for the first time if you are viewing it for the first time. If you are, in fact, a first time viewer, I would very much so strongly encourage you to look back at some of my videos. Specifically, these are the entertainment industry series. And so, if you are interested in the entertainment industries, where I'm going to be talking about how the entertainment industry, specifically as it relates to film and television, how it has changed, why it feels so different. If you are interested in that, then please go check out my other videos. There is an introduction video for this, as well as some other videos. Right now, I'm just trying to establish a baseline, some lingo, some language that we can use on the channel so that people almost immediately pick up on the idea that I'm trying to communicate. This is another one of those videos. Up until this point, we've most likely talked already about the Lost effect. We have talked about the Rocky Horror Picture Syndrome. I think we've even talked about trailer parked, when a film gets trailer parked. And then we've also mixed in a few other ideas that they feel sort of extraneous, not right now, and unrelated to entertainment industry as a whole. They are oftentimes nebulous ideas which apply to other things outside of the entertainment industry, but they do have a usefulness here, and I am going to ultimately apply those back to the topic at hand of film and television. The 400 rule, as you've seen in the title, is one of those ideas. So what is the 400 rule? It's both, I guess it's difficult to explain. I will try in the least amount of time here. Hopefully I'll actually be able to do a decent job of it. Halfway certain that you won't find this rule in any anthropology, psychology, or sociology books out there. But from what I have seen, what I have studied, and then what people have told me, when I say people, just know that it's these people, so to speak, are intelligent. They're not just like, family or friends or something like that. Not to say that my family and friends aren't intelligent. The 400 rule is supposed to be something that essentially applies to pretty much all of us, kind of dictates the way in which we see the past. Obviously, I'll try to give examples of this stuff too, to pull you guys in so that it makes more sense. The 400 rule is based off the idea of the limitations of the human mind. So this plays partially into the FGL principle, which again, if you don't know what that is, please go check out my previous videos. And it also partly plays into our perception of fame and how we look at famous people and rich people, and specifically actors, actresses, writers, directors, people who seem to be successful in Hollywood, how we perceive them. The 400 rule states that the human mind is nearly completely incapable, we're talking like upper 90%, of truly perceiving in a real and, I guess, 3D way any further back or further into the future of 400 years. I know that was clunky. I'm trying to remember the definition of it that I wrote from years ago, and I really can't remember it, and I don't have my phone that I wrote that on. Basically, it's saying that the human mind has limitations on being able to apply human thought and humanity to things that happened further back than 400 years ago, as well as things that could happen 400 years into the future. There's a time limiter on the human mind, so that it essentially, for lack of a better word, is essentially stuck parked in a particular mindset and in a particular mind time, so to speak. The best example that I can give is the idea of, I can't believe I'm going there and I'm saying this, but it's the idea of farting. So most people tend to mature from thinking that fart jokes are actually funny. Most people tend to mature out of that once they reach adulthood, maybe a little past their 20s even. Like a fart would have to be, or someone passing gas would have to be really, really hilarious or done at a very inopportune time in order for adults to be like, oh wow, that was hilarious. I'm laughing at a fart or laughing at a fart joke. But if you go back to when you were a little kid, 7, 8, 9, most little kids, boys and girls, kind of think that fart jokes are just like hilarious. They seem almost to be the peak of comedy. You have really stupid humor like SpongeBob or Adventure Time. They have that stupid humor, and then of course they have the humor that is just utter potty humor, the fart jokes. So here's the thing. If you grew up and as a child you liked fart jokes, and you thought they were just the funniest thing, you as an adult just looking back on yourself and thinking like, wow, that was something that I really enjoyed, and now I think it's immature, that alone kind of blows your mind a little bit. And you'll say, oh, I've changed so much, blah, 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 yada, yada, yada. So then take that same idea that fart jokes are funny to kids and apply it to your parents. Most people, once you start applying it to other people who are older than you, it starts to change. And it becomes this sort of weird thing to where it's a huge disconnect there. So think about your mom or your dad. Your dad probably, when you were a child, if you grew up with your father, he probably was one who was like super open to fart jokes and stuff like that. So you probably don't have that hard of a time thinking about your father as a little child loving fart jokes. But you maybe have a hard time thinking about your mom loving. Then go back further and think, what about your grandparents, your grandfather, your grandma? Think back further to people that you've never met, great grandparents or your great great grandparents, or so on and so forth. What tends to happen to most human minds, and I use farts to try to be safe, but the better example generally is sex and sexual habits and sexual appetites. Because again, if you think about some of the sexual appetites that you may have, there's a good possibility that people older than you in your family lineage might have enjoyed the same, you see what I'm getting at? The further and further back you go, the more ethereal and completely disconnected as an idea that it becomes, until you come back to a certain point in time to where that idea no longer seems like something that's even real, like it's something that's even tangible in real life, but that it is a complete caricature what that particular time was. So for instance, you can potentially think of people really loving fart jokes or loving a certain sexual thing now, but years ago, you try to push it to years ago, 450, 500, 1,000 years ago, and it becomes this thing to where it's like, there's no way that people were doing that, or that people were thinking that, or that people were acting on those sorts of urges way back then. I remember seeing a perfect example of this a couple of years ago, back when I was still using Twitter, and I think it actually went viral too. It was another thing on some sort of sexual exploits, and I think somebody had found something from like our grandparents or great-grandparents generation from like the 1940s or 1950s, and they was doing and or saying or writing some freak nasty stuff. And a lot of people were like, what? People did that back in the day? And it's like, well, people have always been doing that particular thing. When we look at history, we can never fully unite the idea that things that are happening today could easily have been happening, and most likely were happening, not just a year ago, not just 10 years ago, but hundreds of years ago or thousands of years ago. That when we take the technology out of our lives currently, there's almost no difference between human beings of today and human beings of thousands of years ago. Even though we think that there is this huge, immense gap between us, the only thing that is really different is the technology that we have to fill that gap, to bridge that void. A lot of times one of the big sayings that we have is that if you take somebody from history from like 100 years ago, let's say from 1870, if you take somebody from 1870 and you bring them forward to here today and you show them the world as it is now, they will freak out, and it's a much bigger leap in mental logic and mental capacities than it is if you take somebody from 1970 and you bring them to today. Like in 1970, people could at least comprehend some of the things that we have right now, but people in the 1800s, they couldn't comprehend. But the biggest difference though is that even the person from the 1800s, once the shock of technology subsided, what generally would happen is that they would look around, and they could look around at all of the people and say that society has not really changed nearly as much as we might think that it has, as far as how we relate to each other on a personal societal level. I chose the 1870s specifically because it was after American slavery. For the most part, human activity and the way that humans think about things does not change, but we can only perceive of something being real to us, or being something that people actually did both now and way back then. We have a limit of 400 years. So like 300 years, you might be able to say, oh yeah, there were plenty of dudes who liked to do certain sexual activities. But we go back 400 or 450 years, and that becomes a far more sticky point for us. It's just harder for us to comprehend that people could still be thinking of and doing the same or similar things now as they did way back then. So how then does this apply to other principles like the FGL principle, or specifically to fame, art, and entertainment? Well, the 400 rule, as it exists as a limiter, basically what it does is that conceptually it allows to remove a certain level of humanness, a certain level of humanity from the subjects that we are thinking of. So what then does the 400 rule really do, and how does it affect us? So it does really two things efficiently in and for our minds. First thing that it does is that it allows us to distance ourselves and to other people. In that case, I'm using other as a verb, okay? To make people other, to view people as others, above and beyond and apart from ourselves, so that when we look back through history, it almost seems as if we are no longer looking at or studying humans. We other them so that they essentially become alien to us. We look at them and we say, oh, they could never have been as smart as we were, or they could never have been as peaceful as we are. Like, they were always incredibly violent. It allows us, again, to see ourselves as far superior to them in some ways. And that is partially historical bias. That is, God, I don't know if that's a history principle or if it's a psychological principle. But again, the idea that we think people in history are just inherently dumber than the people of today. And that's not always the case. And in fact, it usually isn't the case. People are no different, really. The second thing that it allows us to do is that it allows us to imprint our own biases on history and on various groups throughout history without having to acknowledge any nuances of history. It allows us to compartmentalize history in such a way to where we basically can say that this particular thing that we see now currently all the time is basically how it always was. I guess a good example of that would either be the racism or sexism, right? So especially especially here in America, it's hard for some people to perceive of or to conceive of a time in which there wasn't any racism, at least towards black people, or that there wasn't racism at all, and it was more so ethnocentrism, or hating someone or disliking someone based off of their ethnicity, based off of where they came from in a specific country, as opposed to based solely off of their skin color. And the reason for that is because for some people and for some groups, racism is so prevalent that it's hard to conceive of a time in which it wasn't prevalent and that this was not even a thing. Similarly, I guess with sexism, we have this weird notion in society, especially today, that women either never had power or that they've always been under the rule of thumb of men. And we know that historically that actually isn't the case. There are multiple societies where we can see that there were not only women at or in high positions of command, but that they were treated not nearly in the same way that we treat women today. Some of them were revered, others were treated as, I guess, equals to men, and everybody had their roles, and they knew what their roles were. They acknowledged those roles, and obviously we can't say whether they liked their roles or not, but we do know that the society at that time and for that time seemed to be successful with everybody in their particular place. Let me also say as a disclaimer right now that I'm not trying to get political or be like ultra conservative or anything like that. I'm just trying to explain out this rule so that people can properly digest what it is that I'm saying here. The 400 rule is a limiter on our minds because it helps us to, in some ways, categorize the world around us and things that have happened before us and put our own minds into a bit of a box so that we can focus more heavily and more readily on the world as it currently is for us, as opposed to, I guess, in some aspects, living in or focusing on the past too much. I know that I didn't really explain that well enough or in as good of a manner as I probably would have wanted to. The 400 rule is one of those things that is kind of tricky. It's a tricky thing. Obviously, we have a ton of history, and there are plenty of historians out there and things of that nature, and we can very much so understand history and understand some of the good things about history as well as some of the atrocities of history. So it feels weird for me to come in and then say that our minds are limited in fully understanding it. I guess this isn't really an example, but it's a comparison. The best comparison that I can make is comparing the 400 rule to the limitations that the human mind has on understanding the concept of infinity. As a concept, infinity can sort of be understood in a shallow kind of way. We understand that, yes, something can go on forever and ever and ever. But in reality, when we truly think about it, infinity is a concept that is so massive that it can never fully be understood, mainly because humans have this limiter there as well, in which we always think about something being in or under the auspices of time. And so because something is limited by time, then it has to have either a beginning and or an ending. But infinity has no beginning, no ending, and thusly no middle either. It is kind of has always existed, and that really goes beyond the mind. It doesn't fully make sense to us. The 400 rule is similar to that, because while we can learn history and while we can study it and while we can look at it, history is not something that really is able to be made real within the mind without us starting to adopt ideas that are wholly and uniquely ridiculous, right? For that, the best example that I can give is the pyramids of Egypt. For some people, they just don't want to accept the idea that humans could have made the pyramids. And even if they do accept that idea, they say, well, they didn't make the pyramids on their own, that it had to be some sort of alien intervention or something. We just can't accept the fact or the possibility that humans were smart enough back then to make something that we don't fully understand now. It goes beyond our limiting views and comprehension. That is, in a nutshell, what the 400 rule is. So how then does this apply to art and entertainment? You probably already know as far as the FGL principles. I don't think I need to go there. But as far as fame, you should also understand that inherently too. Essentially, what the 400 rule is that, as I said, with the part one of the rule, it allows us to other ourselves. Well, in this case, when we look at famous people, it allows us to other them, to say that they are, yes, they're people, but also we can look at them as being something other than what we are. And so because there's something that are essentially completely alien to us, we can treat them differently, and we can potentially treat them poorly. So yeah, the 400 rule is not necessarily a good thing, but it is something that I feel like we needed to at least address because it might come up in one of the videos later on down the road. That's pretty much it, everybody. So while I don't have an official sign off yet, I guess I should do the whole please like, comment, share, and if you so desire and you want to see more, subscribe. But more importantly, I will ask that you please go and purchase one of my books. They are mostly ebooks, and pretty much they are all under $10. See if any of my work is actually any good, if it lives up to any of the things that I'm talking about here on my channel, specifically with the entertainment industry videos. So please go purchase my books. All of my links are down below. Thank you.